परम हि अस्मिन् परम मम विभो नाम रूप गुणाहि भाव्यं सत् असत् किंचित अन्यतः नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन् ना परं न समं विभो नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम् सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन् ना परं न समं विभो नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम् सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन् ना परं न समं विभो नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम् सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं ह्यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद
भाव्यं
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम्
सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नरसे किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परं न समं विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यं
गुणार्भाव्यम्
सा च स किञ्चिदन्यतः
सरसर् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परं न समं विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नामरूप गुणैर्भाव्यम्
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम्
सदसत् किञ्चिदन्यतः
सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं ह्यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परां न समां विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नामं रूपं गुणर्भाव्यां
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम्
सारसात् किञ्चिदन्यतः
सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परं न समं विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नामरूप गुणार्भव्यम्
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम्
सरसत् किञ्चिदन्यतः
सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं ह्यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परां न समां विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नामरूपगुणैर्भाव्यं
नाम रूप गुणार्भाव्यम्
सरसा किञ्चिदन्यतः
सरसत् किंचिदन्यतः
नाहं वेद परं ह्यस्मिन्
नाहं वेद परं यस्मिन्
न परं न समं विभो
ना परं न समं विभो
नामरूपगुणर्भाव्यं
Nama Rupa Gunarbhavyam
Sadasat Kinchiranyataha
Sarasat Kinchiranjataha. Any devotees online would like to chant? No, do not. Aham, myself. Veda, no. Param, superior. He, for. Asmin, in this world. Na, neither. Aparam, inferior. Na, nor. Samam, equal. Vibho, O Great One. Nama, name. Rupa, characteristics. Gunai, by qualification. Bhavyam, all that is created. Sat, eternal. Asat, temporary. Kinjit, or anything like that. Anyataha, from any other source. Translation. Whatever we can understand by the nomenclature, characteristics, and features of a particular thing, superior, inferior, pardon me, or equal, eternal or temporary, is not created from any other source other than that of your Lordship, thou so great. Okay, I'll read that again because I interrupted it. So whatever we can understand by the nomenclature, characteristics, and features of a particular thing, superior, inferior, or equal, eternal or temporary, is not created from any other source than that of your Lordship, thou so great. Purport. The manifested world is full of varieties of created beings in 8,400,000 species of life, and some of them are superior and inferior to others. In human society, the human being is considered to be the superior living being. And amongst the human beings, there are also different varieties, good, bad, equal, etc. But Narada Muni took for granted that none of them has any source of generation besides his father, Brahmaji. Therefore, he wanted to know all about them from Lord Brahma. So there are many species of life. And all of these are generated from Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is the secondary creator. He's been empowered by Lord Vishnu to arrange the material elements so that there can be embodied souls on these planets. And according to their karma, then they're embodied differently. So amongst the human beings, there's 400,000 species of life. And within this 400,000, there are gradations, or else, why so many distinctions? So there are different grades of human beings. And this includes very powerful humans as well as very primitive humans as well. So according to their karma, they are awarded facilities to enjoy this material world according to exactly. So they have a different set of senses which are grouped about the mind, which allow them to enjoy certain types of sense gratification, which is their desire. So we are part of this 400,000 now, but what we can understand is that since time immemorial, we've been rotating around the universe. So Brahmanya Brahmite Konya Bhagavan Jeev. So we have been going up and down, and it's according to the will of the Lord, but He's also satisfying our desires. So it's stated that the Lord is actually directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Yantra Rudhani Mayaya, right? So the Lord is actually satisfying our desires. And He's awarding us a certain type of body. So we're in this human form. We're within this section of 400,000 species at the current moment, but we had many other forms of body, and we enjoyed all types of varieties of sense gratification. And the only thing that we didn't do we take it that since we are embodied, this body is the symbol of sin, that because we are embodied, that means that we have some lingering material desires that can only be fulfilled here in this material world. This is the place that we have to figure that whole thing out. So because we're here, we still have something to work on, which means that the only thing that we didn't do in all those species, what do? They eat, sleep, mate, and defend. And they do it a lot, every day, all day long. That's what they do. So we did that quite a bit already in so many millions and millions of bodies. But we didn't revive our eternal service attitude towards the Supreme Lord, which is our real constitutional position. So in this human form of life, we're meant to reawaken that. And different human species have different capabilities to reawaken that, actually. Yes, Maharaj.
When people are praised as being greater than they actually are, generally they appreciate it because they like to think themselves more qualified than they are. But a great personality does not like to be praised more than he is, and he will object. We find that there are some persons who take the role of leaders, gurus, or even incarnations, and their followers exalt them to such a position, and they accept it, and they're happy with it. But no qualified person would ever try to get pleasure from being praised more than he's performed. Example is Prithvi Maharaj. Prithvi Maharaj, very exalted personality, but when he became the leader, he felt that the people were praising him beyond what he had performed, hadn't done anything worthy yet. So he said, please wait till I do something extraordinary, then you can. So Brahma, now he's being presented as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Narad Muni is however, for whatever reason, he's presenting him like this, that you're the supreme, you hold the whole universe. Sometimes the demigods are exalted like this. Shiva is also sometimes called like this, and different demigods. Even Indra, in the Vedas, there are different Vedas that describe different aspects of the demigods, glorify them. And it's easy to become puffed up. There's one instance in the Garga Samhita that's described. Lord Shiva he ended up taking the side of one of his followers, and they were in a battle against Krishna's sons. And so Lord Shiva, with his great strength, he killed one of Krishna's sons. And Krishna came there and said, "What happened? What are you doing, Lord Shiva? You're supposed to be my devotee." And Lord Shiva apologized and said, "I'm sorry. I get so puffed up with my position, my power. I forgot that you're the supreme, and I'm just your servant. Please forgive me." So Lord Krishna forgave him, brought the son back to life, etc. So we have to be careful that we don't get carried away by the praises of our subordinates. Who may praise us to be very great. We shouldn't believe it. We should always think ourselves very insignificant. Even if we're praised highly, we know that we're just an instrument. And if anything happens to come out successful or apparently of a high quality from my apparent endeavors, it's simply Krishna's and the other saintly persons who have been teaching me. It's simply their credit. They've done it. So in this way, one can not take the praise for himself, but rather pass it on to the real person or persons who deserve to be credited. It's like if someone praises someone to be very learned, he wasn't learned before. So if he's has little learning now, it's only by the mercy of his teacher.
Thank you. So Narada Muni has a few more things to say, and then Lord Brahmaji will give his response. So, okay, so maybe can we read another text? Okay. Sabbhavan acharad gohram yattapa susamahitaha tena kedayase nastam parashankham chayachchasi. Translation. Yet we are moved to wonder about the existence of someone more powerful than you when we think of your great austerities in perfect discipline, although your good self is so powerful in the matter of creation. Purport. Following in the footsteps of Sri Narada Muni, one should not blindly accept his spiritual master as God himself. The spiritual master is duly respected on a par with God, but a spiritual master claiming to be God himself should at once be rejected. Nada Muni accepted Brahma as the supreme due to Lord Brahma's wonderful acts in creation. But doubts arose in him when he saw that Lord Brahma also worshipped some superior authority. The supreme is supreme, and he has no worshipable superior. The Ahan Grahopasita, or the one who worships himself with the idea of becoming God himself, is misleading. But the intelligent disciple can at once detect that the supreme God does not need to worship anyone, including himself, in order to become God. Ahangraho pasana may be one of the processes for transcendental realization, but the ahangraho pasita can never be God himself. No one becomes God by undergoing a process of transcendental realization. Narada Muni thought of Brahmaji as the supreme person, but when he saw Brahmaji engaged in the process of transcendental realization, doubts arose in him, so he wanted to be clearly informed. So this is nice that there is a certain process for worshiping oneself with the idea of becoming God. And that's a type of God worship, but it's not very elevated. And it doesn't exactly work out like that. The super soul never or the soul never merges with the super soul, or the Atma never merges with the Paramatma. So persons who are worshiping themselves with the idea to become the super soul of everyone, or the Parabrahman, they're not understanding the Vedic conclusion. The Vedic conclusion is Bhakti Vedanta. So the end of knowledge is to worship the Lord as an individual in loving devotional service. So there's three. There's the personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, there's the Bhakta, and there's Bhakti, which is the exchange. So Krishna, he never had to do meditation to become God. Sometimes some yogis and different persons, they recommend that you do this certain type of meditation, this certain type of worship, certain type of process, and then you will realize that you are actually God. But it doesn't make much sense, because the word God means the supreme being. So if the supreme being is subordinate to illusion, how is it that he's the supreme being? It's not logical. So the supreme being can never be contaminated by one of his energies. If he's the supreme being, everything is from him. So how can the supreme being be overcome or overwhelmed by one of his own creations or one of his own energies? Right? Doesn't make sense. Maybe, we may have some fantasy sci-fi movies where we create robots and then they take over human society or something like that. Right? But God is not in this type of category. God is a supreme intelligent being, and it's not possible for one of his energies to make him into illusion. So it doesn't make sense for somebody to become God. God is always God, and that's Krishna. Krishna is always God. From the very beginning of his life, he was killing the demons, right? Like that. So Prabhupada makes a point here that we shouldn't accept the spiritual master as God himself. Now, the wording on this topic is very subtle, and we have to understand it very clearly, and it has to be repeated again and again. The spiritual master is the representative of the super soul. He's fully revived his service attitude towards the Lord and towards his own spiritual master, and is fully convinced in the purport of the Shastra and can convince others. And one can identify such a spiritual master by his ability to convert many fallen souls to the path of devotional service. Such a person has many wonderful qualities, the 26 qualities of the pure devotees. And such a person is glorified in the Vedic scriptures as being Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam, somebody who has heard in disciplic succession the purport of the Vedic knowledge and is fully fixed in spiritual life, right? Such a person is described by Rupa Goswami to be able to control the urges of the mind, body, force of anger, specifically mind, body, or the urge to speak, urges of the mind, the urges of anger, also the urges of the tongue or the taste, and the belly and the genitals. So such a person never claims to be God, and as soon as he does, he is as good as a dog. Right? But it's very subtle, because simultaneously the bona fide spiritual master has to train his disciples to offer respect to himself as a representative of God. And Prabhupada, he in the early days, he was training his disciples to offer respect to him as a representative of God, while simultaneously training them that he is not to be seen as God himself alone, like Krishna. He's not Krishna, but he's a representative of Krishna, and he's teaching us how to serve Krishna. So this is a very subtle thing, and the wording is there in the Vedic scriptures. Krishna himself even speaks on the topic. And it's said that the guru must be accepted as a worshipable deity, that he is given the same respect as God, but simultaneously the disciples must always understand that he is not Krishna. And there is some pastime where some devotees started to share that Prabhupada was Krishna. And it's misleading, because he is eternally a separate person from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. But the spiritual master is one of the Lord's dear associates, and in that way, they are non-different. That's true. That's a fact. But at the same time, there is a difference. So, as Maharaj was mentioning, the spiritual master never takes a credit for himself. He always passes it to his guru. And Srila Prabhupada, there's a wonderful small clip, or there's a lecture from Srila Prabhupada, and the devotees were praising him, different people, to say, "You have done a wonderful thing." And Prabhupada said, I don't think that, I have done something, so wonderful, but I am simply trying to satisfy or follow the orders of my spiritual master. So that's the credit that one can take, is that he is trying to sincerely, tirelessly serve the order of the spiritual master. And all the credit goes to the spiritual master, because all of his instructions are the guidelines by which the disciple lives his life. and acts in this world. And whether glory comes or otherwise, the disciples' pride and joy is to obediently follow the order of the spiritual master. Because the spiritual master has opened the eyes of the disciple. So he feels incredible debt for the spiritual master, or to the spiritual master. And he also understands it can never be repaid. But if I vigorously preach, I can make my best effort to try to repay the spiritual master. So we have to endeavor with enthusiasm to vigorously preach. But simultaneously, just as Maharaj was saying, that endeavor, right, that intensity of endeavor, the actual activities that we perform, all that is by the mercy of the spiritual master in Krishna. So that's why we say all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga, because we're training ourselves. Nothing for me, everything for Krishna. All the credit, all the blessings are coming from him. I don't have any blessings. I'm bankrupt. Right? So thank you for tolerating. And yeah, so maybe we can have some discussion. Okay, Jai Keshava, then Manan Prabhu. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. I was reflecting on your comments about how Krishna's can never be conquered by anything, or we can't merge into Krishna or the super soul or Paramatma. They're separate things. And how Krishna is a completely spiritual. He's not made of material energy. And so I was reflecting on how sometimes Krishna puts himself in a position that might seem like he is a human. You know, it might seem like, oh, he's being caught up. He's caught up in the body of Kaliya, the serpent, and oh no, what's going to happen? The gopis are in anxiety, and Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj are in anxiety, and so Krishna seemingly puts himself in the position, oh, he might be conquered, but he does this for the pleasure of the devotees. He puts himself in these sorts of positions, but that makes it even more relishable, because we can't have a relationship with something that's amorphous or something that's just energy. We need to have a relationship with an actual being that can reciprocate with us, like we have relationships here and right now. As we have relationships, and then we reciprocate with those we have them with. And so it's might be confusing for someone who is a novice in bhakti, or has some misconceptions about the Vedas and what they're saying. But like you said, we can preach vigorously to help them understand, help those understand that don't yet understand about the different potencies of Krishna and how Krishna's devotees interact with him. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I did want to kind of mention that Krishna's internal energy is so potent that he is conquered by his internal energy, right? That's Srimati Radharani. So that has to also be explained too, that, you know, the only energy that can conquer Krishna is pure devotion. And that energy is also personified as Srimati Radharani. and we can also enter into her shelter through the path of devotional service. And we start off by serving the spiritual master with awe and reverence and obedience, and by the grace of the spiritual master, we can receive the recommendation of Srimati Radharani. So, Anand Prabhu.
So we see here that Narada Muni sees Lord Brahma meditating, doing tapasya. And the question is that if you're meditating and doing tapasya, then how can you be the supreme? How can I understand this? Because as you explained that if I, there's a process of Angrupasana, but that is not the process for becoming a supreme. So if you're a supreme, you don't become supreme by meditating. If you're a supreme, you don't need to meditate and do tapasya. And I'm wondering what's the difference between Lord Brahma's meditation and tapasya? And we have examples of Naranarayana Rishi doing tapasya. Even though he's a supreme, he's still doing tapasya. Or Lord Rama worshipping Lord Shiva. So how do we understand this? Somebody who's the supreme also doing tapasya versus somebody who's not supreme doing tapasya.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the wonderful, attractive features of the pastimes of the Lord, is that even though he doesn't require to do any tapasya or any meditation, sometimes that's his sweet will. He likes to do it. So he does. Like another example that is that when Lord Krishna was in Dwarka, he would rise early. It's stated in the Krishna book, he would rise early and he will do meditation. Right? But, he'll meditate on himself, actually, just to show that, yeah, this is the regulative principles for the householders, is to rise early and do this tapasya. But it's not that we take example and we meditate on ourselves. Rather, we don't imitate, but we follow in the footsteps. So we learn from Krishna. He's showing how to do regulative principles. So that's one of his supreme opulences, is that he's so kind that he exemplifies how to follow the path of spiritual life, even though he's himself the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, his different avatars, they're under different categories, Leela avatar and different categories of those. And he has his own reasons, which are also revealed in the scriptures and by the acharyas, for coming and performing certain, tapasya or certain Leela. So, in one sense, it's the reason why he does these things is to attract our mind, is that he appears on this world, it's stated, to reestablish principles of religion, yes. So he does some tapasya, give that process, and to also curb the miscreants. He does that too. But Prabhupada says the real reason, and really the only reason why he actually comes, is to give pleasure to his pure devotees. So when we see him doing that, doing tapasya, we are attracted. Because we may have some affinity for that type of process. And when we see that he's doing it and he's supremely perfect in it, and he's doing it, he doesn't even need to do it. That's attractive. So that we are attracted, and then we can come to devotional service. So, is that okay? Okay. Jai Keshava Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. I just wanted to add a little comment to that. In Bhagavad Gita 3:22 through 24, it says, "O son of Pritha, there is no work prescribed for me within all the three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything, and yet I'm engaged in prescribed duties. For if I ever failed to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings.
Very nice. Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees.